No one ever really looked at Daniel Morris, not in a way that stayed with them. People passed him every day without slowing down, without remembering his face 5 minutes later. He stood near the glass doors of the Jefferson Commerce Center in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, wearing a navy blue security uniform that was always clean but never new. His name badge was scratched from years of being brushed by coats, bags, and hurried shoulders. Daniel worked the night shift from 6 o'clock p.m. until 6 o'clock a.m., the hours when the city softened and the noise pulled back like a tide. During the day, the building buzzed with office workers, delivery drivers, and meetings that mattered to someone else. At night, it belonged to him, the hum of fluorescent lights, the quiet whir of elevators resting between floors, and the distant echo of traffic drifting in through the glass. Daniel was 52 years old, though his posture made him look older. His shoulders leaned forward slightly, as if he had been carrying something heavy for too long without putting it down. He didn't scroll on his phone much. He didn't wear earbuds, he just watched. Watched people leave work tired and distracted. Watched janitors clock in without speaking. Watched reflections of strangers in the glass doors as they walked past him without knowing his name. He nodded politely every time, even when no one nodded back. Inside him was a quiet weight, not dramatic, not loud, just always there. A lifetime of being needed only for what he could provide, not for who he was. He had learned not to expect conversation, not to expect gratitude, and definitely not to expect to be remembered. Yet every night when the city grew quiet and the building lights dimmed floor by floor, Daniel stayed alert, standing tall, guarding something no one thought about until it was missing. And in that unnoticed space, his story was quietly unfolding, moment by moment, breath by breath, unseen by almost everyone. But that night, something small was about to shift, even if no one realized it yet. Daniel lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the west side of Cleveland, above a closed-down laundromat that still smelled faintly of soap and rust. The apartment was modest, clean, and carefully kept, as if he were preparing for guests who never came. A small kitchen table sat near the window, usually empty except for a folded newspaper and a mug that read "World's Best Grandpa," a gift from his daughter years ago, before distance grew between them. He had 2 framed photos on the wall. One showed a younger Daniel holding a little girl with curly hair at Edgewater Beach, both smiling into the sun. The other showed that same girl in a graduation cap, standing beside a woman who no longer lived there. Daniel woke up every afternoon around 2:30 p.m., his body trained by years of night work. He brewed cheap coffee, watched the local news on low volume, and ate whatever was easy. Canned soup, toast. Sometimes eggs if he felt like washing the pan. Money was tight but stable, the kind of stability that keeps you standing in place instead of moving forward. He didn't complain about it. He had learned early that complaining didn't change much. Before work, he often sat by the window and watched people walk by. Couples arguing softly, kids riding bikes, a man yelling into his phone, life happening without him. Sometimes he thought about calling his daughter, Emily, who lived in Columbus, now with a job and a life that didn't have room for long phone calls. He never wanted to interrupt. He told himself she was busy, that she would call when she had time, so he stayed quiet the way he always had. At 5:15 p.m., he put on his uniform, checked his pockets, and locked the door behind him. He took the bus downtown, sitting near the back, watching reflections slide across the window as the city changed block by block. He blended in easily, a man in uniform, a man going to work, nothing worth noticing. But inside him, memories traveled with him every night, unspoken and heavy, waiting for something, though he wasn't sure what. And tonight, those memories would feel closer than usual. The Jefferson Commerce Center at night felt like a different building altogether. Without the voices and footsteps of the daytime, every sound became clearer. Daniel clocked in, greeted the other guard finishing his shift, and took his position by the front desk. The other guard, a younger guy named Marcus, gave him a quick nod and left without much conversation. Daniel didn't mind. He preferred the quiet. He made his first patrol at 7 o'clock p.m., walking the same routes he had walked for years. Past empty conference rooms with chairs pushed in neatly, past break rooms with forgotten coffee mugs, past windows that showed the city glowing softly under streetlights. He checked doors, logged times, and adjusted a flickering light on the 3rd floor that maintenance never seemed to fix. Around 9:30 p.m., a woman from one of the law offices came down late, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She didn't look at him as she passed. Daniel held the door open anyway. "Have a good night," he said gently. She nodded without stopping. He returned to his desk, wrote a note in the logbook, and sat back down. These moments used to bother him more, the way people didn't see him. The way his presence faded the second they walked past. Over time, the hurt dulled into something quieter, not gone, just tucked away. Around midnight, he heated up his dinner in the staff microwave, a plastic container of leftover pasta. He ate slowly, savoring it, watching the security monitors. Empty hallways, locked doors, a city resting. He wondered how many other people were awake right now, doing jobs that went unnoticed. Truck drivers, nurses, cleaners. Guards like him, people keeping things running while everyone else slept. The thought brought him a strange comfort, knowing he wasn't completely alone in the quiet. Still, there was a feeling he couldn't shake, like something unfinished, something waiting just beyond the routine. And soon, that feeling would have a reason. At 1:47 a.m., Daniel noticed a light on the 6th floor that shouldn't have been on. It wasn't unusual, but it caught his attention anyway. He checked the monitor again, then stood up, joints stiff, and grabbed his flashlight. The elevator ride up was slow, humming softly as it climbed. When the doors opened, the hallway was empty, carpet clean, air still. The light came from a small office near the corner, the door slightly open. Daniel approached calmly, his footsteps measured. Inside, he found a young woman sitting at a desk, head in her hands, shoulders shaking quietly. She startled when she noticed him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wiping her face. "I didn't mean to set off anything. I just needed to finish something." Daniel raised his hands slightly, keeping his voice gentle. "You're fine," he said. "No alarms, I just saw the light." She nodded, embarrassed, explaining she was an intern who had stayed too late and missed the last train home. Daniel listened, really listened, something he rarely got to do. He offered to call her a cab using the building phone and waited with her until it arrived. They talked a little about work, about being tired, about how quiet the building felt at night. She thanked him before leaving, looking directly at him, saying his name from the badge. "Thank you, Daniel." The words landed softly but deeply. After she left, the hallway felt different, not louder, not brighter, just warmer. Daniel turned off the light, logged the incident, and returned to his desk. He sat there for a long moment, hands folded, staring at nothing in particular. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, even if only briefly. And that small moment would stay with him longer than he expected. The rest of the night passed quietly, but Daniel couldn't stop replaying that brief interaction in his mind. It wasn't anything special on the surface. He hadn't done more than his job. Yet the way the young woman had looked at him, the way she had said his name out loud, made something shift inside him. By the time his shift ended at 6 a.m., the sky outside the glass doors was turning a pale gray, the city stretching awake again. Daniel signed out, nodded to the morning guard, and stepped into the cold air. He waited for the bus like he always did, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. But this morning felt different. Not better exactly, just lighter. As the bus rolled through quiet streets lined with closed diners and glowing gas stations, Daniel noticed small details he usually ignored. A waitress sweeping the sidewalk outside an all-night diner, a delivery truck unloading bread behind a grocery store, a man jogging slowly, headphones in, breathing hard, people moving through their lives, each carrying their own unseen weight. When Daniel reached his apartment, he unlocked the door and stood still for a moment, listening to the familiar silence. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, holding the warm mug between his hands. His thoughts drifted to Emily again. He wondered what she was doing, whether she was sleeping or already awake, rushing to work. He picked up his phone, unlocked it, then locked it again without dialing. Some habits were hard to break. Still, the feeling from earlier lingered, being acknowledged, being human to someone even for a minute. Daniel eventually went to bed, the city noise faint through the walls, his mind unusually restless as sleep finally found him. And when he woke up later that day, something small had already changed. That afternoon, Daniel woke earlier than usual. The sun was still high, spilling light through the thin curtains. He lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him. He felt tired, but not in the same heavy way. After getting up, he showered, shaved carefully, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than he normally did. He noticed the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard. He wasn't unhappy with what he saw, just thoughtful. He made a simple lunch and turned on the radio instead of the TV, letting quiet music fill the apartment. Before leaving for work, he stopped by a small corner store down the block, a place he'd passed hundreds of times but rarely entered. The bell above the door rang softly as he stepped inside. The cashier, an older man with tired eyes, nodded at him. "Even in," the man said, though it was barely 4:30. "Even in," Daniel replied. He bought a sandwich and a bottle of water, then hesitated before leaving. "Busy today?" he asked, surprising himself. The cashier shrugged, same as always. They shared a small smile. It wasn't much, but it felt like practice, like testing a muscle he hadn't used in a while. On the bus downtown, Daniel didn't sit in the back. He took a seat near the middle, watching the city roll by. When he arrived at the Jefferson Commerce Center, he clocked in and took his place. Everything looked the same, but Daniel felt more present, more aware of his surroundings. He stood a little straighter, his eyes more open. He didn't expect anything to happen. He didn't need it to. But the night had more quiet moments waiting for him. Around 8 o'clock p.m., a cleaning crew came through the lobby, pushing carts and chatting softly in Spanish. Daniel greeted them as they passed, earning a few nods and smiles. One of the cleaners, a woman named Rosa, stopped briefly to ask him if the vending machine on the second floor was working again. Daniel checked his notes and told her it had been fixed earlier that week. "Good," she said, relieved. "Those nights are long without snacks." Daniel smiled. "I hear that." It was a simple exchange, but it stayed with him. As the night deepened, he made his patrols, noticing details he'd long taken for granted. A small plant someone had left by a window, a sticky note on a monitor that read "Call Mom," a jacket draped over a chair, forgotten in the rush to leave. Each item felt like a quiet reminder that real lives passed through this building every day, even if their traces were small. Near midnight, Daniel saw the intern again, leaving earlier this time. She waved shyly as she passed the desk. "Good night, Daniel," she said. "Good night," he replied, surprised by how natural it felt. He watched her leave, then returned to his logbook. The hours moved steadily, not dragging, not rushing. Daniel felt anchored in the moment, less lost in his thoughts. He wasn't suddenly happier. He wasn't pretending things were different than they were. But something inside him felt steadier, like he was standing on firmer ground, and that sense of steadiness would soon be tested. At 2:15 a.m., the fire alarm panel began flashing with a minor alert. Not an emergency, just a sensor fault on the loading dock door. Daniel followed procedure, radioing maintenance and heading down to check it himself. The dock was quiet, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. A delivery truck was parked crookedly, its driver sitting inside, scrolling on his phone. Daniel approached and knocked lightly on the window. The driver rolled it down, startled. "Door didn't close all the way," Daniel explained calmly. "It's triggering the sensor." The driver apologized, climbing out to fix it. As they waited for maintenance, the two men stood in silence, then exchanged a few words about the cold, about long hours, about coffee not being strong enough. Nothing personal, nothing deep, but it felt honest. Once the issue was resolved, Daniel logged the incident and returned upstairs. As he sat back down, he felt the familiar weight creeping in again. The understanding that these moments, however meaningful, were brief, that when the sun came up, people would forget his face again. The steadiness he'd felt earlier wavered, not breaking, just bending. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the hum of the building, and let the feeling wash over him without pushing it away. He had learned that some nights were like that, quiet, connected, and lonely all at once. And before the shift ended, another reminder was waiting for him. The reminder came just before dawn when Daniel checked his phone and saw a missed call notification. No voicemail, just a number he didn't recognize at first. He stared at it for a long moment, then realized it was Emily's old number, the one she sometimes used when her main phone died. His chest tightened slightly, not with panic, but with a quiet ache. He wondered how long ago she had called, whether it had been an accident or something more. The shift ended a little after that, the sky outside turning from dark blue to pale orange. Daniel signed out, nodded goodbye to the morning guard, and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet pavement and early traffic. On the bus ride home, he kept thinking about the call. He imagined different reasons. Maybe she just wanted to check in. Maybe she needed something. Maybe she had dialed without meaning to. By the time he reached his apartment, his thoughts felt tangled. He sat at the kitchen table again, coffee untouched, phone resting beside his mug. After a few minutes, he pressed the call button. It rang twice before Emily answered, her voice sleepy but warm. "Dad," she said, surprised. They talked quietly, carefully, like people stepping around fragile ground. She apologized for missing him earlier, said work had been hectic. Daniel told her it was fine, that he'd just gotten off work. There was a pause, then she asked how he was really doing. The question caught him off guard. He almost gave his usual answer, but something stopped him. "I'm okay," he said finally, "just tired sometimes." Emily didn't push. She just listened. When they hung up, Daniel felt drained but lighter, like a window had been cracked open in a room that had been closed for too long. And that small opening would stay with him through the next night. That evening, Daniel arrived at work with a different kind of awareness. The building greeted him the same way it always did, quiet and orderly, but he felt more connected to it, as if he were part of its rhythm rather than just standing beside it. He checked in, reviewed the log, and began his patrols. On the 4th floor, he noticed a light flickering in a hallway and made a note to report it. On the 2nd floor, he found a lost scarf draped over a chair, soft and patterned, probably forgotten in a rush. He placed it neatly at the front desk, tagging it like protocol required. Around 10 o'clock p.m., a young man from a tech startup came down, looking stressed, tie loosened, eyes tired. He asked Daniel if there was anywhere nearby still open for food. Daniel suggested a diner 2 blocks away that stayed open all night. "They make a decent grilled cheese," he added. The man smiled faintly. "Thanks," he said genuinely. Moments like that didn't change Daniel's life, but they stitched something together inside him, thread by thread. Later, during his break, Daniel sat by the window and watched the city lights. He thought about how many people depended on him in small, invisible ways. Doors unlocked, lights noticed, problems caught early. He wasn't saving lives, he wasn't making headlines, but he was present. And tonight, that felt like enough. Still, the night wasn't finished showing him what presence really meant. Near 1 a.m., Daniel heard a soft sound that didn't belong to the building. A quiet sobbing, barely audible, coming from a bench near the entrance. He approached slowly and found an older man sitting there, hunched over, face buried in his hands. Daniel didn't rush. He stood a few feet away and spoke gently. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked up, eyes red, surprised. He explained that he was waiting for a ride that hadn't shown up, that his phone battery had died, and that he didn't know what to do next. Daniel listened without interrupting. He offered the man a chair, a glass of water, and the building phone. While the man called his daughter, Daniel sat nearby, pretending to review paperwork, giving him privacy without leaving him alone. When the call ended, the man thanked Daniel over and over, his voice thick with relief. Daniel waved it off. "That's what I'm here for," he said, but inside, the moment settled deep. He recognized the feeling in the man's voice. The fear of being stranded, the relief of being noticed. When the man finally left safely, Daniel stood by the door for a while, watching the empty street. He felt a quiet understanding pass through him, something shared between strangers who had both felt invisible at different times. And that understanding would echo long after the doors closed again. As the night stretched toward morning, Daniel returned to his desk, the building calm once more. He wrote his final notes in the logbook, careful and precise. Sensor alert resolved, lost scarf logged, visitor assisted. Simple entries, each one holding a small human story behind it. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes briefly, listening to the steady hum around him. He thought about his daughter, about the intern, about the older man on the bench. Different lives, intersecting with his for a few quiet minutes. He realized that being unnoticed didn't mean being unnecessary. It just meant the work was quiet. The city outside was beginning to wake again, unaware of the night that had passed, of the small acts that had kept things moving smoothly. Daniel stood, straightened his uniform, and prepared to hand over the shift. He felt tired, yes, but also grounded, like his feet were firmly on the floor beneath him. As he walked toward the exit, he glanced once more at the empty lobby, its lights dimmed and peaceful. He didn't know what the next night would bring. He didn't need to. For now, it was enough to know that he had been there, fully, quietly doing his part, and the meaning of that would soon deepen in an unexpected way. The unexpected meaning began to take shape later that week, on a Tuesday night that started like any other. Daniel arrived early, the sky already dark, winter pressing closer to the city. As he signed in, he noticed a small envelope resting beside the logbook. It had his name written on it in careful handwriting. For a moment, he wondered if it had been left by mistake. No one ever left him notes. He picked it up slowly and opened it. Inside was a simple thank you card. No company logo, no official stamp, just a short message written in blue ink. It was from the intern. She thanked him again for helping her that night, for being kind when she felt overwhelmed, and for making the building feel less intimidating after hours. "You mattered more than you know," she had written. Daniel read the card twice, then a third time. He didn't smile right away. Instead, he sat down and held the card carefully like something fragile. It wasn't praise, it wasn't dramatic, it was acknowledgement, something rare. He placed the card inside his jacket pocket before starting his patrol, feeling its presence there, warm against his chest. As he walked the familiar halls, the building felt subtly different again. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He thought about how easily moments passed without being marked, how many small kindnesses disappeared into routine. Tonight, one hadn't. And that stayed with him as the hours moved forward, quietly reshaping the way he carried himself. And that single piece of paper would lead him to reflect on a much larger part of his life. During his break, Daniel found himself thinking about his earlier years, before the uniform, before the night shifts. He remembered working construction in his 20s, long days under the sun, hands rough and aching. He remembered taking the security job when Emily was still small, needing something steady, something predictable. Night work had paid a little more, and childcare during the day had been easier back then. Somewhere along the way, the nights became permanent, friends drifted away, weekends lost their meaning. Life narrowed quietly without drama. Daniel hadn't resented it, he had simply adapted. But now, sitting alone with a paper cup of coffee and a thank you card in his pocket, he wondered how many parts of himself he had folded away to keep things running smoothly. He thought about the things he used to enjoy. Fixing old radios, listening to baseball games on AM stations, taking long walks near the lake. None of it was gone exactly, just paused. The thought wasn't sad, it was reflective. He realized that being unnoticed had become a kind of armor. It protected him from disappointment, from expecting too much. But armor, worn too long, also made movement harder. Daniel finished his coffee and stood up, feeling the weight of years settle and then ease slightly. He wasn't planning a big change. He wasn't rewriting his life. He was just noticing it again. And that awareness would soon follow him beyond the building's walls. The following morning, instead of going straight home, Daniel got off the bus a few stops early. The air was cold and sharp, his breath visible as he walked toward a small diner tucked between a hardware store and a closed pharmacy. He had passed it countless times without going in. Tonight, or rather this morning, he pushed the door open. The bell chimed softly. Inside, a few night shift workers sat scattered across the booths. A waitress poured coffee without asking questions. Daniel slid into a booth by the window and wrapped his hands around the mug she brought him. He ordered eggs and toast, nothing fancy. As he ate, he watched the street wake up slowly. A man unlocking a shop, a woman walking a dog, a bus sighing as it pulled away from the curb. No one knew who he was. No one needed to. That was okay. When he paid the bill, the waitress said, "Take care, hun," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel stepped back outside, feeling fuller than the meal alone could explain. The city didn't feel so distant in that moment. It felt shared, and that sense of sharing would linger when he returned to work the next night. Back at the Jefferson Commerce Center that evening, Daniel noticed small changes in himself. He greeted people first. He made eye contact. He spoke with a little more confidence without forcing it. The cleaning crew responded warmly. Marcus, the younger guard, lingered longer during shift change, chatting about sports and traffic. Daniel listened, adding a comment here and there. It felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. During his patrols, he caught himself humming softly, an old tune he hadn't thought about in years. The building, steady and quiet as ever, seemed to hold these moments without judgment. Daniel knew none of this would make headlines. It wouldn't change his job title or his paycheck, but it changed how he occupied his place in the world. As the night deepened and the lobby grew still, Daniel sat at his desk, the thank you card tucked safely in his locker now. He thought about how lives brushed past each other constantly, how meaning wasn't always loud or permanent. Sometimes it was a card, a conversation, a diner at dawn. He leaned back, breathing evenly, feeling present in a way he hadn't in a long time. And soon, he would be reminded that presence could also bring quiet responsibility. The reminder arrived on a night when the temperature dropped suddenly, the kind of cold that settles into concrete and glass. Daniel noticed it first in the way the lobby felt sharper, less forgiving. Around 11:30 p.m., a woman entered the building, hesitating just inside the doors as if unsure she belonged there. She was wrapped in a thin coat, hair pulled back hastily, eyes tired in a way Daniel recognized. She approached the desk and explained that she was early for an overnight training session scheduled to start at dawn, that her bus schedule had changed, and she had nowhere warm to wait. Daniel checked the roster and confirmed her name. Protocol didn't require him to do anything beyond letting her sit in the lobby, but he offered her a cup of water and pointed out the restrooms. He didn't make it a big deal, he just made space. As she settled into a chair, pulling her coat tighter, Daniel returned to his desk but stayed attentive. Responsibility wasn't about control, it was about care. He checked the doors more often, kept the lights steady, made sure the building felt safe without being oppressive. The woman eventually fell asleep, chin resting on her chest, breathing slow and even. Daniel watched the security monitors, aware of how thin the line was between indifference and attention. He thought about all the nights he had needed someone to notice small things, fatigue, hesitation, silence, and how often no one had. Tonight, he could be that quiet presence for someone else. When morning came and the woman woke, startled and embarrassed, Daniel smiled gently and told her she was right on time. She thanked him, relief softening her face. He nodded, nothing more. And that simple act would follow him home in an unexpected way. After his shift, Daniel returned to his apartment, feeling the weight of the night in his bones. He slept lightly, dreams drifting in and out, filled with hallways and voices fading around corners. When he woke, the light outside was muted by clouds. He made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the thank you card he had placed beside the framed photos. He picked it up, then set it back down. On impulse, he reached for his phone and opened his contacts. Emily's name sat there unchanged. He typed a short message, erased it, then typed again. "Hope you're doing well." No rush to reply. He stared at it for a long time before hitting send. The rest of the day passed quietly. He did laundry in the basement, folding clothes carefully, methodically. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge he'd been ignoring for months. These small acts felt grounding, like claiming space that had always been his but rarely acknowledged. In the early evening, his phone buzzed. Emily had replied, "I'm okay. Just busy, thanks for checking in, we should talk soon." Daniel read the message twice. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't dramatic, but it was open. He placed the phone down and sat back, letting the moment settle. Sometimes connection didn't arrive as a flood, sometimes it came as permission, and that permission would matter more than he expected. That night at work, Daniel felt a steady calm beneath the routine. He moved through the building with practiced ease, his steps sure, his awareness wide. Near midnight, Marcus approached him with a question about handling a confused visitor earlier that evening. Daniel listened, offered a suggestion, and reassured him that he'd done fine. Marcus seemed relieved. "Thanks," he said. "You always know how to keep things smooth." The comment surprised Daniel. He hadn't thought of himself that way, smooth. Reliable, he nodded, accepting it without deflecting. Later, as he reviewed camera feeds, he noticed the city outside framed in glass, lights scattered like quiet signals. He thought about the responsibility of being present, not just physically, but emotionally. It meant noticing when someone lingered too long, when a voice wavered, when silence asked for patience. It wasn't heavy exactly, it was intentional. Around 3 a.m., he stepped outside briefly, checking the perimeter. The cold bit at his cheeks, but the street was calm, empty in a peaceful way. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, breathing in the night, feeling anchored. He wasn't invisible to himself anymore, and that self-recognition would carry him into the final hours of the shift. As dawn approached, the building began its quiet transition again. Lights flicked on floor by floor. The first early workers arrived, coats zipped, eyes half closed. Daniel greeted them, returning their nods, holding doors open. He completed his log entries with care, noting not just incidents but patterns, the rhythm of nights. The small ways people relied on consistency. When his shift ended, he didn't rush out. He stood by the glass doors for a moment, watching the street fill slowly with movement. He thought about the man he had been years ago, working nights without question, shrinking his world to fit necessity. He hadn't done anything wrong, he had done what was needed, but now he understood something new. Being unnoticed wasn't a flaw. It was a condition that could change moment by moment through attention and choice. Daniel stepped outside into the morning air, tired but steady, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that presence wasn't about being seen by everyone. It was about being available when it mattered. And the meaning of that would settle fully by the end of one ordinary night. The ordinary night that followed felt different because Daniel no longer expected it to be anything else. He arrived at the Jefferson Commerce Center with the same uniform, the same badge, the same calm routine, but his attention moved more gently now. He noticed how the lobby lights reflected faintly off the marble floor, how the building breathed in its own quiet way. During his patrols, he paused longer at windows, watching traffic thin out and then disappear entirely. On the 7th floor, he adjusted a chair that had been pushed back carelessly, not because it mattered to the building, but because someone would notice it in the morning, even if they never knew who fixed it. A janitor thanked him for holding an elevator. A delivery driver asked him the time. Each exchange was brief, forgettable to most people, but Daniel held them lightly, not tightly, letting them pass without needing them to become more. Around midnight, he found himself thinking less about how long the shift would last and more about how it felt to be inside it. Time moved more smoothly that way. He realized he had spent years waiting for nights to end instead of inhabiting them. Now he let the hours exist as they were, without rushing them away. The building didn't demand urgency, it demanded steadiness. And Daniel offered that freely without resentment. And in that steadiness, something quietly settled inside him. Later, while seated at the desk, Daniel watched a reflection in the glass doors, his own. For a moment, he didn't look away. He saw a man who had carried responsibility without recognition, who had learned to disappear in plain sight. He also saw someone who had endured without bitterness, who had kept showing up even when no one was watching. The thought wasn't heavy, it was factual. Around 2:30 a.m., the building was silent except for the soft hum of electricity. Daniel wrote in the logbook slowly, carefully shaping his handwriting. The act felt grounding, like leaving proof that the night had been lived. He thought about Emily again, not with longing, but with patience. Whatever their relationship became, it didn't need to be forced into shape. It could grow naturally, like trust does when it's allowed space. He folded his hands and rested them on the desk, breathing evenly. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete. And as the night stretched on, completion took on a new meaning. Near the end of the shift, the sky outside softened into early morning gray. Daniel made his final patrol, slower than usual, not out of fatigue, but intention. He paused in places he usually passed through quickly. The break room, the stairwell. The lobby bench where people sometimes waited when they didn't know where else to go. These spaces held traces of human presence, warmth that lingered even after people left. Daniel understood now that his work wasn't just about preventing problems. It was about holding the space between arrival and departure, between uncertainty and relief. When the next guard arrived, Daniel briefed him calmly, handing over the logbook with quiet care. He didn't offer advice unless asked. He trusted the rhythm to continue without him. As he stepped outside, the city greeted him without ceremony. Cars passed, a bus pulled up, someone laughed nearby, life moved forward. Daniel stood there briefly, letting the moment exist without trying to define it. And that ordinary moment carried more weight than he once believed possible. Daniel's life didn't change dramatically after that. He kept the same job, he lived in the same apartment, he still worked nights while most people slept. But something inside him had shifted into place. He no longer measured his worth by how visible he was to others. He understood that quiet work didn't mean quiet value. The city would never stop moving past him. People would still forget his face, and that was okay. He had learned that being unnoticed didn't mean being unseen. Some things were felt instead of remembered. As Daniel rode the bus home one final morning, watching the city wake again, he rested his head lightly against the window. He wasn't waiting for anything now. He was simply present, carrying the quiet knowledge that ordinary lives, lived carefully and kindly, leave marks even when no one names them. And in that understanding, he found a calm that didn't ask to be recognized.